Hello learners, today we shall be focusing on the poem named The Daffodils by William Wordsworth. You all know that William Wordsworth is a nature poet, a nature lover. The Daffodils is one of the most famous poems written by Wordsworth. The Daffodils is also commonly known as I wandered lonely as a cloud, which is named after the first line of the poem. It is basically a lyrical poem which was written in 1804, and you must know that it was not an imaginary poem. It was a true experience of the poet while traveling. The poem was first published in Poems in 2 volumes in 1807. The very first line of the poem informs the poet's profound sentiment of being left alone. Actually, he was suffering from some kind of loneliness, some kind of depression, because he had lost his brother John. His brother had died. The poem has 4 stanzas bearing 6 lines each. It is a simple and lucid poem, you will see. The poem deals with the subjects of memory and nature also, which were close to the hearts of the romantic poets of that age. The poem bears simple and uncomplicated meaning. So, let's get started with the poem. The first stanza begins like this. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. Beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. The poet says that he was traveling alone, just like the clouds do. The clouds float over the hills and vales in the sky. Now, while traveling, the poet chanced to see a field of daffodils. He came across a large number of daffodils beside the lake and under the big trees. The flowers were fluttering and dancing with the breeze, with the air. You see, in the very first line, the poet compares himself to the cloud. This is an example of simile. He also uses crowd and host to indicate that he saw a vast area of the golden daffodils. The poet also personifies the flowers by saying that they were fluttering and dancing. As the flowers were dancing and fluttering, so it also indicates that it was a breezy day, an airy day. So you get an overall idea of valleys and mountains and a lake also. In the second line, the poet says, continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. Here the flowers are compared to the stars. So here the poet also uses simile, the figure of speech. The flowers stretched in a continuous line, just like the stars in a galaxy in the Milky Way. They were also shining and twinkling like the stars do. So the comparison makes it clear to us that the flowers were heavenly as the stars. As long as the poet sees, he sees countless daffodils. That's why he uses the phrase never-ending line. The continuous and never-ending line may also indicate that the flowers left a never-ending impact on the poet's mind. You must note here the poet says 1,000 I saw at a glance. Could the poet count the flowers? No. He exaggerates it by using a hyperbole. The poet wonders seeing the daffodils because he had never seen so many flowers together before. The poet says that they were tossing their head in happiness. Actually, the poet was amazed at seeing the flowers. So with the flowers, the poet also felt joyful and he felt happy. Here also they were tossing. The phrase indicate that the poet personifies the flowers. Let's come to the stanza 3. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. Waves in the bay were dancing, and they were looking gleeful at this atmosphere. But the daffodils surpassed the waves in their happiness. Having such cheerful company with the daffodils, the poet could not help being happy. He was staring at the daffodils continuously with wonder. The word gazed is used twice to indicate how moved or amazed the poet was with the sight of the daffodils. Forgetting his surroundings, the poet stared and stared. He kept on staring at the daffodils because they provided him with such a jocund, such a happy company that he forgot all about the surroundings. The fourth stanza says, "For oft when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils." Now the poet starts the fourth stanza with "for," because he clarifies why the sight of the daffodils was so important to him. He says whenever he is in a vacant or in pensive mood, means whenever he feels lonely, whenever he feels alone and stays in his house, the sight of the daffodils flash in his inner eyes, that means in his mind. He had wondered before in the third stanza what wealth did the sight bring to him. Now he clarifies his answer by saying that they really brought some wealth, the wealth of happiness when he is alone in his house, because the daffodils then flash in his mind and they provide him with joy again. So we see that the daffodils have left an everlasting impact on the poet. That's why he calls it a bliss of solitude. Whenever he sees the daffodils in his imagination, his heart fills with joy, with happiness. So that is the bliss of solitude, he says. Not only he feels happy, but also his mind dances with the daffodils then. So you see how vividly, with a simple language, the poet describes the natural landscape and the flowers. The daffodils and everyday found flowers are portrayed so magically by the poet that they rise in a high esteem. They also leave an everlasting impact in the reader's mind. So learners, this was the poem all about. If you want any questions to be discussed, you can write me in the comment section. I'll be there with another video. Till then, keep studying and stay happy.